Wyoming Territory, September 1876. The wind swept low across the dry hills near Fort Laramie, carrying with it the smell of dust and pine. Olivia Harlow reigned in his bay, gelding at the edge of the small cemetery, his eyes settling on a woman kneeling alone by a fresh grave. Her black dress clung to her frame in the breeze, and her hands trembled against the mound of earth as if she was holding her heart together with her fingertips. He had come for supplies. He had not meant to find this. The woman did not look up as he dismounted, boots crunching softly over the scattered gravel. Olivia hesitated, hat in hand, feeling like an intruder in a moment too private for the world. But something held him there. She reached forward and brushed her fingertips across the wooden cross stuck into the ground. "Sleep easy, my sweet girl," she murmured. Her voice was hoarse, cracked from crying. "I will carry you every day." Olivia's chest tightened. He had seen death on cattle drives, in saloons, on muddy battlefields back east, but this quiet grief was different. It was deeper, heavier. He stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said gently. She turned, startled, swiping at her face before she faced him fully. Her eyes were red, but her spine straightened. There was pride in her, even in ruin. "I am sorry," he said. "I did not mean to disturb you." She stood slowly, brushing her skirt. "You did not," she said. "This land has no rules anymore. Not for grief." He nodded, words sticking in his throat. She looked no older than 25, but there was a tiredness to her, the kind earned by years of carrying more than one person's share of sorrow. "My name is Olivia Harlow," he said. "I am staying up near the Pine Ridge Trail. Came into town for flour and fence nails." She gave a small nod. "Liora Prescott. That was my daughter, Rosalie." "I am sorry, Miss Prescott." "Mrs." she corrected quietly. "But not anymore." He looked toward the grave, then back at her. "If there is anything I can do, there is not." He did not move. The sun was sinking behind the low hills, and the cemetery cast long shadows. She looked so alone. Leora's hands twisted in front of her. "She took sick 3 weeks ago. Fever came on sudden. The doctor could not stop it." Her voice dropped. "I thought I could. I held her all night." She was only 6. Olivia's heart clenched. He had nothing to offer against that kind of loss, but he did not leave. "I have a place out east of here. Small homestead. My husband passed last year, out in the Black Hills. Mining accident." Her voice went flat. "It has just been me and Rosalie since." He saw the hard lines in her face, the way she kept herself from falling apart only by sheer will. She was not fragile. She was shattered, but standing. "You should not ride back alone tonight," he said. "It is near full dark already. Too many things out here do not sleep when the sun goes down." "I have no fear left," she said, but her voice was tired. "Still," he said, "I would feel better riding with you." She looked like she might say no, but then she nodded once. They rode side by side in silence. The moon rose behind them, pale and soft. Her house stood alone at the edge of a dry meadow, a one-room cabin with a lean-to and a split rail fence that sagged in 3 places. He saw the child's chair on the porch, carved with flowers. Liora dismounted and tied her mare. As she moved to the door, she paused and looked back at him. "Would you like coffee?" He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Inside, the cabin was warm but sparse. A quilt lay folded on the rocker in the corner, and a small hand-stitched doll sat on the shelf. Liora moved like a woman used to doing everything herself. She poured water into the kettle, set it on the stove, and lit the flame. "I do not know why I let you come," she said without looking at him. "Because you are stronger than you think," Olivia said. "And even strong people should not be alone every night." She looked at him then, her eyes tired but steady. I do not want pity. I do not offer pity. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once and turned back to the stove. They drank coffee quietly on the porch as the stars came out. Liora did not speak of Rosalie again that night, and Olivia did not press. But when he stood to go, she touched his arm. "Thank you," she said, "for not asking too much." He looked down at her hand. It was calloused, strong. "You should not have to carry it all alone." Her eyes flickered, but she said nothing more. He rode back to his camp late, but sleep did not come easy. The picture of her kneeling at that grave stayed in his mind, not just the sorrow, but the way she had stood up from it. A week passed before he saw her again. He had taken to riding the long way into town, hoping, though he would not admit it. When he found her at the edge of her land, trying to mend the fence with a hammer too small for the job, he dismounted without a word and took it from her. "You do not have to," she started. "I know." He drove the nails in clean. She stood beside him, arms crossed. "I do not remember asking you," she said. "You did not," he said. "But I am here anyway." She studied him for a moment. Then, quietly, "I do not know how to let anyone help. Then let me be the first." He did not touch her. He did not rush her. But that night, when she brought him water and bread, she sat beside him on the porch and talked about the roses Rosalie used to plant by the steps. And when he left, she said his name softly. "Olivia." He turned. "Will you come back tomorrow?" His heart beat harder. "Yes," he said. "I will." And he did. Every day after. By early October, the heat had lifted from the plains and the mornings came sharp with frost. Olivia rode out before sunrise, breath fogging in front of him, saddle leather creaking with each shift of weight. He brought a weathered sack of seed potatoes tied behind his saddle and a pair of woolen socks he'd bought from a Shoshone woman near the fort. He didn't say why he carried them. He just brought them. Liora met him at the fence line, sleeves rolled, hair braided back. She didn't ask why he'd come again. She only passed him a spade without a word and knelt where the soil dipped near the back of the house. "We should start here," she said, brushing away the leaves. He crouched across from her. "So the roots don't freeze too quick?" She nodded once. "And so they stay quiet through winter." They worked side by side in the hush, earth breaking apart beneath their hands. The sun climbed slowly, warming the backs of their necks. He didn't speak until the last row was mounded. "You always plant alone?" "Had to." He watched her brush dirt from her palms. "You don't anymore." Liora stood and looked toward the distant rise of hills. "I know." Inside, she boiled water and set out a square of cornmeal bread. Her movements carried a new steadiness, like the weight she bore had shifted, not lighter, just better balanced. "You work cattle," she said as he poured his coffee. "I see the dust on your coat. Drive them south in spring, north again by fall. This year I stayed." He sipped. "Didn't feel the pull of the trail come August." "You ever stay anywhere long?" He shook his head. "Not until now." She stared at the steam rising from her cup. "Why now?" Olivia didn't answer right away. He looked out the small window instead, where the fence line ran crooked and the wind stirred the dry grass. "Because you're here," he said finally. She didn't look up, but her fingers tightened around the handle of her cup. That afternoon, he repaired the hinge on the barn door while she stripped the last apples from the crooked tree behind the house. She handed him two before he left, wrapped in a cloth. "You can bring the sack back tomorrow," she said. "I'll bring it back full." She didn't ask with what. 3 days later there was rain. Not a storm, just a slow, steady fall that soaked into the roof and made the world quiet. Olivia arrived soaked through, leading his gelding under the shelter of the lean-to. Liora opened the door with a candle in hand, her shawl pulled tight. You're wet through. I rode anyway. She stepped aside without another word. He hung his coat near the stove while she warmed a blanket beside the fire. The room smelled of damp wool and iron pots and the faint sweetness of dried rose hips. She poured him a ladle of stew and set it before him without asking. You'll get sick if you keep riding through weather like this. I've been through worse. That doesn't mean you should. He looked at her across the table. I didn't want to miss a day. She lowered her eyes but didn't look away. I didn't want you to. The rain tapped gentle against the roof while they ate. No music played. No voices rose. But something steady passed between them, like the warmth of the stove spreading from stone to skin. After the meal, she took down a small tin box from the shelf and opened it with care. Inside lay pieces of lace, a handful of buttons, and a faded ribbon. She wore this in her hair, Liora said, touching the ribbon with a finger. When she ran through the grass, it trailed behind like a bird's tail. Olivia didn't speak. He only reached across the table and rested his hand over hers. Liora didn't move for a long moment. Then she turned her palm upward and curled her fingers around his. You don't try to take it away, she said. No one can. That night he slept on a pallet by the fire. She set down an extra quilt and said nothing more. But before she turned in, she paused at the doorway. I sleep better when I know someone else hears the wind. He watched her silhouette fade into the darkened corner of the room. I'll be here, he said, and he was. By late October, frost clung to the porch railings like lace at dawn, and the sky held a stillness that felt like waiting. Olivia arrived before the sun cleared the ridge, his saddle blanket damp with dew, a coil of rope tied behind him. Liora stood in the doorway, arms folded against the cold, her eyes meeting his with something less guarded than before. I cleared the chimney last night, she said. Smoke was backing up. Smart to do it before snow settles deep. He stepped onto the porch. I brought a drawknife. Thought I'd help strip that old pine you've been saving. She opened the door and stepped aside. It's out back. Been curing since spring. They worked behind the cabin in the hush of the morning. The log set across two sawhorses, bark curling under the blade as they passed it back and forth. Olivia's hands moved slow and practiced. Liora's carried the rhythm of someone who had learned by doing everything twice. The air smelled of sap and cold wood. After a while, she said, Rosalie used to sit just over there. She'd collect pine cones and line them up by size, pretend they were little people. He paused, blade stilled in his hand. You ever think of leaving this place? I did. Then I looked at the floorboards and remembered her steps. I couldn't put them behind me. He nodded, running a thumb along the smooth edge they'd just finished. Some places hold more than walls. They didn't speak again until the log was stripped clean. She reached for the end and helped him carry it to the lean-to, her grip steady. I thought of selling it once, she said as they set it down. The land. But no one would have seen what she saw in it. That seemed wrong. He rested his hands on his knees. You don't have to prove anything by staying. I'm not, she said. I'm just not done loving her here. Evening settled early, the sky bruising to violet. Olivia built a fire in the yard pit while Liora brought out a kettle of beans and 2 tin bowls. They ate with the fire between them, the light catching her profile cheekbones drawn from heritage, not hunger, and eyes that no longer looked past him. He set his spoon down. You ever think about teaching? Teaching? There's a schoolhouse starting near Rawhide Buttes. Small. They'll need someone. You know more than most folks I've met. She looked at the flames. I never thought past the next chore. My schooling stopped at 13. You read better than I do, and you listen more than most. She looked at him then, brow drawn. Do you think I could teach after all this? You've lived through things most folks only read about. That counts. She was quiet for a while. Then, I don't know if I'm meant for more than surviving. I think surviving taught you how to give more than you know. The wind pushed smoke sideways through the trees, and distant coyotes barked once and went quiet. Liora reached for the kettle, refilling his bowl. I wouldn't have considered it if you hadn't said. He met her eyes. I wouldn't have either if I didn't mean it. They sat long after the fire settled to embers. When she stood, she didn't go inside right away. I'm thinking of turning the back field. It's rocky, but there's space for root vegetables. I'll help. She looked at him with something testing. You're staying past winter then? If you'll have me. She nodded, slow and sure. Then I'll save a corner of the barn for your horse. He didn't touch her. Not yet. But he took her hand as they stepped inside. And this time, she didn't let go. By the second week of November, snow lined the tops of the ridges. It hadn't reached the valley floor yet, but the air carried a bite that made Liora lay an extra quilt at the foot of Olivia's bedroll each night. He never said anything about it, only folded it back in the morning and left it in place. That Saturday, she took down the ledger her husband had kept. It sat untouched since the spring before Rosalie's illness, its pages stiff with dust. Olivia glanced up from the kindling he was splitting near the hearth. You tallying accounts? Trying to, she said, easing onto the stool beside the table. There's a week's worth of confusion here. I never learned his way of setting things down. Let me see. He wiped his hands on a rag and crossed to her side. He used trade shorthands. You can tell by the slashes. This one's for a half-pound of shot. And this, he tapped a symbol near the bottom, means 2 bolts of cloth. She studied the page. I would have guessed it meant vinegar. He smiled faintly. You'd be forgiven. He had his own system. Liora traced the margin with a fingertip. I never asked him to show me. I thought I'd always have time. You know more now than you did yesterday, Olivia said. That counts. She closed the book. I'm thinking of keeping it my own way from now on. Something clearer. He let his hand rest on the table beside hers. Then it'll be yours. Not just borrowed from a man who's gone. She didn't speak, but she didn't move her hand away either. The next morning, Olivia rode out early to check the creek that ran cold and narrow through the east stretch of her land. When he returned near midday, he found her standing near the barn, hair tucked under a scarf, holding a folded slip of paper. A letter came, she said, from my aunt in Nebraska. She heard about Rosalie through someone passing by the station. Your mother's sister? She raised me after my parents died. I haven't seen her since I married. She looked down at the paper. She asked if I'd come stay with her until I found my feet again. He shifted his weight. Are you thinking of going? I was. After the funeral, I nearly left that same week. But I couldn't make it past the end of the road. She handed him the letter. He didn't read it, just held it for a moment, then gave it back. You've built something here, he said. Even if it's cracked in places. I just don't know if I belong to it anymore. You don't have to decide today. She folded the letter and tucked it into her apron. I already did. I wrote her back this morning. He waited. I thanked her, told her I had someone steady helping me now. His chest went still. You sure? She looked up at him. I wouldn't have written it if I wasn't. Later that day, they walked the fence line together, checking where the rails leaned from last spring's thaw. Liora carried a small pouch of nails. Olivia brought the hammer, slow and methodical with each strike. You ever miss the trail? She asked. Sometimes, but I never liked being nowhere in particular. She paused near a crooked post. You think you could like being here in particular? I already do. She knelt to hold the rail in place. I keep wondering what Rosalie would have thought of you." He looked toward the sky. A hawk circled high above the far ridge. "I think we'd have gotten along. She had strong opinions." "So do I." Liora stood, wiping her palms against her skirt. "She would have asked you 100 questions about cattle. I'd have answered every one." They kept walking. The sun hung low, golden through the bare cottonwoods. When they reached the edge of the pasture, she stopped. "I found her doll this morning," she said. "Under the rocker." He waited. "I thought it would break me, but it didn't." Her voice wavered. "I held it, and I remembered her singing to it. And then I just sat there." He watched her carefully. "That's not weakness." "No." It felt like breathing after being underwater. That night, she didn't prepare a separate bedding for him. When he stepped through the door, she was already pulling down the shutters. The fire burned low, and the cabin was quiet but not heavy. She met his eyes. "I want you to stay." His voice was soft. "Then I will." She reached for his hand, fingers sure now. "Not just through winter. I want you to lay roots here. With me." He stepped closer. "You're certain?" "I've never been more." He brushed a thumb along her cheek. "Then we'll build something that holds." She leaned into him, and he held her, quiet and steady. The wind moved outside, but inside, they were still. And together. The snow came on a Wednesday, soft as breath and without warning. It fell clean and quiet through the branches, layering the fields in silence. Liora stood near the front window, arms tucked around herself, watching the white settle over the rise where the pasture fence bent east. Olivia had gone out early with a canvas wrap to cover the root cellar door, and she could see his figure moving slow and steady through the drift. She stepped away from the window and stirred the oats on the stove. The fire crackled low, and the smell of cinnamon bark steeping from the tin she'd unearthed 2 days earlier filled the cabin. She hadn't meant to use it, not yet, but something about the first snow called for it. When Olivia came in, his coat dusted white and his cheeks red from the cold, she handed him a tin mug without a word. He drank, then glanced around the room. "You moved the rocker." "I did." He looked at the new position of the chair, angled toward the hearth now, not the door. His eyes met hers. "You mean to stay?" "I do." He sat slowly, the heat settling into his shoulders. "I've been thinking," he said, setting the mug down beside him. "There's a man in Rawhide who teaches woodwork. I'd like to apprentice under him come spring, if there's room." Liora folded the dishcloth with careful hands. "You'd be good at that. I want to build you something that lasts, not just patch things." She walked to the hearth and knelt to stir the coals. "What would you build first?" "A proper table. One big enough for more than two." She turned, resting her elbows on her knees. "You planning for company?" "I'm planning for a future." Her mouth softened. "Then I'll plant double rows next year. I'll fence in the east field," he said. "We could bring in a milk cow. We'll need a roof over the lean-to if we do." He smiled then, not wide but real. "I'll draw it up." She leaned back on her heels. "You always been quiet about wanting things?" "I've always wanted the wrong things. Until now." They fell into rhythm over the next weeks. He rose before the light, tending to the horses and checking the traps he'd set for rabbit and fox. She mended linens and stitched new cuffs into his shirts, using thread wound from the last of Rosalie's sewing tin. They didn't speak of her each day, but her presence lingered in the small things: how Liora folded the quilts, the way Olivia stepped lightly near the rocker. One afternoon, while gathering kindling along the creek, Liora found a carved stone tucked among the roots of a pine. It was shaped like a bird, worn smooth by time. She turned it in her palm, then slipped it into her coat pocket and walked home with a quiet purpose. That evening, she handed it to Olivia. It reminded me of something Rosalie would have carried, she said. But I think it's meant to be given. He took it carefully. You sure? I'm sure. He didn't pocket it. He set it on the shelf near the door, where the morning light would catch it. In January, he built a sled from scrap oak. It was rough but strong, and when they took it to the slope west of the cabin, Liora laughed for the first time in weeks. He watched her, cheeks flushed from the cold, hair loose under her scarf, and thought he'd never seen anything more whole. As the days stretched longer, they began clearing the barn's loft with the idea of adding a second stall. Olivia found an old hinge wedged behind a beam, and when he showed it to her, she only said, "We'll need 2 more just like it." No hesitation, no looking back. At supper one night in early March, he reached for her hand across the table. "There's no preacher here and no church," he said. "But I'd ask you all the same." She didn't blink. "Ask me." He swallowed. "Will you marry me, Liora? Build this life with me?" She didn't smile. She only reached forward and laced her fingers with his. "I already am." They married in the clearing behind the house, with the cottonwoods still bare and the sky soft as wool. A neighbor from 2 ridges over, a woman who had once read for circuit sermons, spoke the words. Olivia carved 2 simple rings from cherry wood and gave them to Liora as the wind stirred around them. They built the table that spring, wide and strong, with notches along the edge where their hands had slipped. Liora planted carrots and turnips in the back field, and Olivia returned from rawhide with a chisel set wrapped in cloth. When the rains came, they stayed inside and read aloud from the books Rosalie had carried home from the school wagon. They spoke of adding a second room, of painting the front door blue come next summer. One night, as the lantern burned low and the wind curled around the eaves, Liora touched her belly, then looked at Olivia. He didn't ask, but she answered anyway. "Late," she said. "By nearly a moon." He wrapped his arms around her, and she leaned into him, quiet and certain. The days passed slow and full. They mended what broke. They added where they could. They laughed sometimes and wept when they needed to, but always together. And when the next snow came, it found the cabin warm, the hearth glowing, and 2 sets of boots by the door side by side, worn but sturdy, enough for the road they'd chosen.